Alright, we're going to talk about cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is the opposite of photosynthesis. In photosynthesis, you have carbon dioxide and water come into the cell, and oxygen and glucose leave the cell. In cellular respiration, you have glucose and oxygen come into the cell, and carbon dioxide and water leave the cell. The first part of cellular respiration is going to happen in the cytoplasm of the cell, and then it's going to move into the mitochondria of a cell. Remember that mitochondria can be found in plants and animal cells, whereas for photosynthesis that can only happen in plant cells. The first step in cellular respiration is called glycolysis, and that's the step where you turn glucose into pyruvate. Glucose has 6 carbons in it. Those 6 carbons are bonded together. When you break them in half, you get 2 groups of 3 carbons, and one of those groups of 3 carbons is called pyruvate. Notice that this happens outside of the mitochondria in the cytoplasm. Whenever you break a bond, you're going to form some ATP. ATP is what the cell uses as energy, so it needs energy to perform all the processes that it needs to. It's going to use ATP for that. The other thing that you get when you break that bond is you free some hydrogens, and those hydrogens are going to become electron carriers. And the electron carriers are going to carry electrons to the electron transport chain. We'll talk about the electron transport chain as the last part of cellular respiration. Those electron carriers for cellular respiration are called NADH and FADH. Notice that they both have an H on the end. That H comes from when you've broken the bond in glucose. After you've formed the pyruvate in glycolysis, that pyruvate's going to move into the mitochondria and go through the Krebs cycle. In the Krebs cycle, it's going to be broken into smaller pieces, and it's going to become carbon dioxide as a byproduct. And by breaking those bonds, you're going to form some more ATP and some more electron carriers. So you're going to add some H's to the NADH and FADH. By the time you've got the carbon dioxide as a waste product, you've now used all the carbon from the glucose at the beginning, so all you've got left are the hydrogens that were stored in the electron carriers. And all of those are going to move into the electron transport chain. So we're going to take the electron carriers that were formed in the Krebs cycle and in glycolysis and dump them into the electron transport chain, which is sometimes called the ETC. Those hydrogens at the end of those molecules are going to combine with oxygen to form water as a byproduct, and that process is going to produce some more ATP. So the whole purpose of cellular respiration is to produce ATP. That's energy for the cell. So this is how your cell takes food, which is your glucose, and turns it into energy, which is ATP. Alright, now we're going to look at an alternative to cellular respiration. Here at the top we have cellular respiration listed. We go from glycolysis to the Krebs cycle to the electron transport chain. But for this process to work, you have to have oxygen present. Whenever a process requires oxygen, we call it aerobic. Aerobic means with oxygen. But sometimes your cells can't get enough oxygen, and so they need to have an alternative solution to be able to produce ATP. And the other way that they can produce ATP is called fermentation. Fermentation is an anaerobic process because it happens without oxygen. You've probably heard of fermentation in the making of wine or beer. That's because one of the byproducts of fermentation is alcohol. And so when your cells perform fermentation, they produce alcohol. The other thing they produce is lactic acid. If you've ever worked out for a long time and felt sort of like your muscles are burning, that's because they're producing lactic acid because they're not getting enough oxygen. And that's also the reason you're sore usually for a couple of days after you work out. That's because that lactic acid stays in your muscles for a few days before it's broken down. So fermentation is what your cells are going to do when they need to get energy, but they don't have enough oxygen to do it through cellular respiration. Alright, now let's compare these two processes, photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Photosynthesis happens in the chloroplast. The chloroplast is green because it contains chlorophyll. In photosynthesis, we start with carbon dioxide and water. Those are our reactants because that's what's reacting. And when they combine, they yield oxygen and glucose. Those are our products because that's what is produced. Compared to cellular respiration happens in the mitochondria. Remember, mitochondria can be found in plant and animal cells. Chloroplasts are only in plant cells. At the beginning of cellular respiration, we have oxygen and glucose. Those are the reactants because that's what's reacting. And then when we combine them, they yield carbon dioxide, water, and ATP, which is the energy that your cell needs. And those are our products because that's what is produced. Notice that these are opposite reactions because our products for photosynthesis are the reactants for cellular respiration, and our reactants for photosynthesis are our products for cellular respiration. Now we're going to look a little more closely at these formulas. The formula for photosynthesis is 6CO2. That means there's 6 carbon dioxide molecules combining with 6 water molecules. That arrow is read as yields, so carbon dioxide plus water yields glucose and oxygen. It yields 6 oxygen molecules and 1 glucose molecule. So this is photosynthesis. And the formula for cellular respiration is just the opposite. We start out with glucose. We combine it with 6 oxygen molecules. That yields 6 carbon dioxide molecules and 6 water molecules. And it also produces energy, which is ATP in your cells.